we're going to talk about, our tropical products and services, both what comes from the National Hurricane Center in Miami and what we kind of add to that and refine locally. Last year, we were fortunate enough to have Dan Brown from the National Hurricane Center, or NHC, talk about what they provide. This year, myself and my colleague Kurt Caceres will be covering this material. So there's a lot of information, so let's go ahead and get into it. So basically it comes down to, we're trying to help everybody understand what they should know about the Weather Service tropical products and services for this season. Barry already kind of talked about the list of names this year, and we've already had to cross off Ana, which seems to be an annual occurrence last few years. Just to kind of review, and as I mentioned leading off, the Hurricane Center, NHC, provides the big picture, and that complements and guides what we issue from our local office here in Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley. So just to review, this is kind of a pyramid of the tropical cyclone products. As you're farther out in time, 5 days or more, you have the tropical weather outlook, which, as we'll be talking about and has already been mentioned, started on May 15th this year. There's just a few things you can look at this time range. There's lots of uncertainty. As we get a little closer to maybe a projected landfall or approach timeline, in that 3 to 5 day window, there is that 5-day forecast cone. There are public advisories, the wind speed probabilities abbreviated here with the percentage sign, the forecast discussion, and as we get a little bit closer in time, in that 2 to 3 day window, we get an increasing number of these products. The tropical storm and hurricane watches typically go up when about 48 hours or so before the onset of the tropical storm force winds. And we also can start sending out the hurricane threats and impacts, or HTI graphics. In certain instances, that can be done as much as 72 hours prior with some coordination between the NHC and the local offices. And then as we approach that kind of 36-hour, the H-minus 36-hour time frame, or just a little bit beyond that, we get into the warning phase for tropical storms and hurricanes. The products get more detailed in the warning phase, obviously, as the forecast confidence increases as we get closer in time. Again, and that's when we start generating the hurricane local statements, continue with the HTI. We issue what we call the TCV, or the Tropical Cyclone VTEC product, as Barry touched on when discussing the survey of some of these products and services, how they were used last season. And of course, the operational storm surge products as we get closer in time, and the Hurricane Center starts running their P-surge model. So on this map, just kind of a broad overview of the weather forecast offices that issue tropical products. Here we are in Brownsville, but basically it's all along the Gulf and East Coasts, and a couple offices inland, as those circulations sometimes work inland, as we saw a couple times last year. Also, a couple offices in Southern California can issue tropical products if there's impacts from a system coming out of the East Pacific along the coast of Mexico. And of course, the Pacific Islands and San Juan, Puerto Rico in the Atlantic, which as of last year is actually now one of our backup offices as well, our tertiary backup office in San Juan. So we'll start off with some of the reminders of what has changed recently and what's new for the 2021 season. Not too many major changes for this year, but there are some important ones. As has been discussed a little bit already, the routine production of those tropical weather outlooks for the Atlantic Basin began on May 15th of this year. And it's probably just as well, since they probably would have been doing quite a few special tropical weather outlooks for Ana and for our little swirl in the Western Gulf late last week. The experimental graphical depiction of storm surge inundation values, which we'll show an example of in a bit, with the public advisories, will continue for this year. It has been decided that the Greek alphabet will not be used for storm names should it become necessary. If we exhaust the initial list of names, I believe we'll be using a supplemental list of additional names, but basically the Greek alphabet will not be used, so we won't see another beta, delta, iota, etc. going forward. We'll talk about the wireless emergency alerts and associated messaging and some things to be aware of there. We'll talk a little bit about the Weather Forecast Office Tropical webpage and all the great information you can access there, especially in the event of an approaching storm. And there is still the ability to issue what we call coastal flood warnings, advisories, and statements, and our surf zone beach forecast during tropical events. That was not allowed until a couple of years ago, but now it is under certain circumstances. Again, May 15th, NHC started their Atlantic tropical weather outlooks. This is kind of a subtle point that I know Barry mentioned as well, but as for this year anyway, there is no change to the official start of hurricane season. That still begins on June 1st. But these tropical weather outlooks will provide information on any possible development that occurs between May 15th and June 1st, of course, the time window we're in right now. Pretty solid reasoning for this change. I edited this, but now we've got 7 straight years with at least one named storm in the Atlantic before the official start of hurricane season on June 1st. Last year in 2020, the Hurricane Center actually issued 36 of these special tropical weather outlooks before June 1st. And some of these do impact the United States. 5 of those systems out of the 7 have had impacted the United States in some way, shape, or form before the official start of hurricane season. So, right now is the time to start being aware. So this is an example of that experimental graphical depiction of the storm surge inundation values. This map will be produced again this year. Basically, it shows the peak storm surge inundation, which is the maximum, range of height of water along the coast above what's normally dry ground. So this will be issued, of course, for the U.S. Gulf and Atlantic coast, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and these values will be the same as those provided in the public advisory from the Hurricane Center. So in this example here, if you're along the South Carolina coast near Myrtle Beach, the storm surge is expected to reach as high as 5 to 8 feet above what's normally dry ground at the immediate coast. We touch on this every year, but it's always good to keep in mind about the wireless emergency alerts. So I'm sure most of you in the emergency management community are certainly well aware of this, but it is an alerting network in our country designed to disseminate emergency alerts to mobile devices such as smartphones. As far as the National Weather Service goes, WEA is triggered for hurricane warnings, extreme wind warnings, and storm surge warnings as far as the tropical product suite goes. If you have a 4G device, there are Spanish messages as well, with the Spanish set if you have it set for Spanish as your primary language. And again, on the 4G networks, you can get 360 character messages. If you have a lower level of service, you will still get those 90 character messages, which basically point you to check out other sources for more information. So just as an example, we won't read all of these, but if you're able to receive the 360 character WEA messages, let's say for an extreme wind warning, like Barry mentioned earlier, if you would see this on your phone, National Weather Service, an extreme wind warning is in effect for this area for the immediate danger of life-threatening winds till such and such time. Take cover now in the interior room of a sturdy building away from windows. Protect your head from flying debris. Do not get out in the calm of the hurricane eye, winds will quickly become dangerous again. So even if it's only 360 characters, there's some pretty good detailed information in these longer messages. If you're on a 3G or older network, you get a shorter message, but it would just say extreme wind warning for this area till this time, take shelter now. And then of course you can go to other sources for more information if it's safe to do so. So again, the implementation of some of these messages depends on your carrier. And the way these are disseminated, of course, is through the cell tower network. Let's say this red outline is the box of your warning. So the carriers generally broadcast those WIA messages from the cell towers within that warning area, at least in the WIA 1 and 2.0 versions. So there is a possibility, though, of people not technically inside the warning polygon due to some bleed over with adjacent cell towers, where the signal overlaps could receive the WIA message despite not being technically in the warning. For example, this cell tower's radius kind of just touches the warning and may receive the WIA messaging. What's coming along and is the WIA 3.0, though I'm not sure I don't think it's implemented for all cell carriers thus far, but they are working on getting us down to more precise geolocation targeting information, perhaps as good as 0.1 nautical miles, which is about 600 feet or so. But again, that capability will depend, of course, on your phone type and your cell phone carrier. Again, this is just kind of an overview map as far as the storm surge watch and warning WIA messages. The pink represents the farthest possible inland extent of a storm surge watch or warning, based on what we call the category 4 or 5 MOM, maximum of the envelope of meows, or the maximum envelope of water. It's a technical point there, but so these are the areas that could be alerted via WIA. The watch warning advisory map on the Weather Service front page and the point and click pages. So this is generally your coastal, what we call coastal forecast zones, and maybe one zone or so inland. And then if you look at yellow, those are the areas that generally one county or zone inland from the pink, where the storm surge warning or watch could be disseminated via the emergency alert system and no weather radio using the VTEC coding. However, but in all cases, the actual warning area will be smaller than the pink area on this map. The pink area is kind of based on that worst case scenario. So now we'll switch gears just a little bit and talk about our WFO tropical web page, which these pages have been built for all the tropical offices that I identified before. And just wanted to say that our MIC, Mike Buchanan, is still on the team that works on updating these pages every year, and there's a lot of fantastic information available there. It's our one-stop shop, and we've got a link to the site here at the top, and this will, of course, be included in the slides we send out afterwards. And there is a link to the tropical page if you go to our homepage of our office at weather.gov/RGV. You'll get a link to the tropical webpage. There's an active storms tab that becomes active once the Hurricane Center initiates tropical cyclone advisories, of course. And then as you scroll down the page, it provides access to those products from the Hurricane Center for each active storm, as well as the rainfall products. Again, flooding rainfall has kind of been our thing the last several years. Those rainfall maps are actually produced by the Weather Prediction Center in College Park, Maryland. Yeah, just as an example here, this is from Harvey back in 2017. Again, when there's an active storm, this active storms tab becomes active. You get a view of the cone, some of the probabilistic weather information, which we'll cover in a bit. There's There's also a threats and impacts tab as you progress toward the right. As a default, it kind of gives you a frequently asked questions about the hurricane threats and impacts, but that information will change when there is an active storm again. It communicates the threats and potential impacts for each of our 4 main hazards, of course, which are, of course, wind, storm surge, flooding, rain, and tornadoes. And also this HTI information, which we'll have a few details of in a moment, helps you know, kind of what's the preparation level you need to focus on with a safety margin factored in based on the uncertainty in the forecast. Next, we have the local products tab. Of course, again, when there's an active storm, this is where you can view the entire text of the hurricane local statement text product. And the additional products available from the drop-down menus include extreme wind warnings as applicable, any coastal hazards, surf zone forecasts, flash flood warnings, and as we get into the unfolding phase and afterwards of recovery, local storm reports and the post-tropical cyclone reports and any public information statements we put out for rainfall amounts and peak wind speeds would be available there as well. The satellite and radar data are always available from our local WFO tropical webpage, whether there's a storm out there or not. Again, this radar image is from Harvey in late August 2017. And there's also a preparedness tab, which is always available, providing a quick access to local evacuation maps, preparedness guides, videos, all kinds of great stuff in there for preparedness activities. There is also available some Spanish translation. If you click on if you look at the NHC links part of the page, there should be a radio button where you can toggle back and forth between English and Espanol, where it actually toggle the titles of these various products from the Hurricane Center into Spanish. And you can look there, or also Florida International University in Miami also maintains their page where they translate many of these products as well. That's at huracanes.fiu.edu. And also for many of these products, there's a toggle button at the bottom of the text as well. If you're viewing it in English and you click that button, it should give you the Spanish version of that product also. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Kirk for a bit, and if he would like to jump in and talk about the next few set of slides. Take it away, Kirk.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to discuss the local time zones in the National Hurricane Center products, and the products will be using local time. And this will include the public advisory discussion, the time of arrival graphics, and next slide, Josh. Okay, so local time when a Hurricane Center issues their advisory will be at 11 a.m. Central to the Eastern. That will be 10 a.m. Central, and you can see the time zones. Eastern will be 1 hour ahead, and then they also have the Atlantic time, which you'll see the products now be for the islands, the Windward Islands, and other points across the Atlantic. And at very rare times, you may see some of the advisories with Cape Verde time, which will be 4 hours ahead of our local time. But again, locally, the products will come out at 4 a.m., 10 a.m., 4 p.m., and 10 p.m. Central Time. Next graphic, please. Okay, one product you'll see will be the multi-day flash flood risk graphic, and this will be issued. It's now operational for all the tropical cyclones that affect the U.S. It's based off the WPC excessive rainfall outlook. WPC sends out excessive rainfall outlook every day, actually several times a day, but they'll also incorporate this into tropical products. And it will display the maximum flash flood risk given at a location anytime in the next 3 days. This product only usually goes out for 3 days, and you can look at it in this graphic right here, over the next 3 days, it shows southwest Louisiana having a high risk, 50% or greater. And then on the right-hand side, you'll have the timing on thumbnails, and that will show day 1, day 2, and day 3. So again, the highest, for this example, the highest risk will be across southwest Louisiana on day 1, and then the threat moves further inland into the north and northeast, and then by day 3, the area has a marginal risk across southwest Louisiana. Next slide. Next slide, Josh. Okay, what Josh spoke about earlier, the storm surge watch and warnings. And there's been really no change with this. This storm surge watch and warning became operational for the U.S. and the East Coast and the Gulf Coast back in 2017, and for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands back in 2019. The warning highlights areas of significant risk of life-threatening inundation of storm surge, and that is water moving across relatively dry land. The watch is issued for storm surge about 48 hours before the possibility of life-threatening surge or other hazards that would hinder evacuation. So that would be, it's an important, when there's a watch, there is a chance that some of these evacuation routes could be impassable. There's a chance of that happening. That's why it's a watch. Yeah, we issue a grid at a much finer resolution than the NWS zone. So it's even though Cameron County is, may show up as a zone, it's just an extreme portion. For this example, right along South Padre Island and the Ship Channel. It won't include the whole entire county, as the threat will be near the coast. Next slide, please. And what is the difference between the storm surge warning and the storm surge watch? Again, it's for the danger of life-threatening inundation from rising, moving water inland from the shoreline. So for the warning, that's within 36 hours, and that means to promptly complete all evacuation and to address the instructions for local officials. The watch is the possibility or a chance that it's going to happen, or better than the slight chance. It'll be more of a good chance that we will be seeing it, but it's within 48 hours. So that's the main takeaway: is 48 hours you could see life-threatening, the possibility of life-threatening inundation, while the warning is 36 hours. And again, the term is a danger of life-threatening inundation, not just a little bit of rising water, but the danger of life-threatening inundation, where roads and would be impassable, and water into homes, and major issues with storm surge. Next slide, Josh. So how do these maps differ? Again, the watch warning graphics show the areas that are at risk for life-threatening flooding, and the graphic is intended for the general public, and the graphic is human-generated with changes needed. So there will be some tweaks and changes to the product. Next slide, Josh. And this is you may be familiar with this. This is more of the potential potential storm surge flooding maps. And this is what you may see. And this is more for decision makers. It's computer generated, and it's based off the National Hurricane Center current forecast. But these map values may change. So the bottom one is the image that you see is computer generated, and it's more of where flooding could occur and how much above ground the flooding could be. It's basically the realistic worst case. So as you see, the graphic to the top is more detailed, but it also has human generated. So that's important too, that it's not there is some human aspect, and it is taking account for other local expertise that the forecaster may put in or may take out in forms of storm surge. Next slide, please, Josh. So this is a big change that Josh spoke about earlier, and this is the in the past when we have a tropical storm watch or warning, when we have watches and warnings along the coast for the potential of a landfalling storm, all coastal hazards drop off, and that includes the CFW, which you'll find things such as the high surf, coastal flooding. Those products dropped off once we had a watch or warning. Well, this year we can have a storm surge watch or warning along with the coastal flood messages. So again, that's the main takeaway, is that coastal flood, coastal hazard messages will now be issued during the tropical event. Again, in previous times, you would see watch or warning post, and we'll have to drop the coastal hazard. So coastal flood warnings, watches, and advisories will not be issued when there's a storm surge watch or warning. So that is for to get rid of any kind of confusion. So if there's a storm surge watch or warning, there will be no coastal hazards issued. However, you can see we can issue watches and warnings for coastal hazards if it's just a general tropical storm or hurricane warning. And main issue you'd see that is what happens on the shoulders, the bookends of the storm surge. There will still be some flooding, not again life-threatening, but there will be some hazards. So that's the whole reason that they come up with this change, is that you could see some coastal hazards on the shoulders of the storm surge watches and warnings. And their coastal flood warnings will describe water levels above ground inundation. So, and that will also be consistent with what's in the TCV and the HLS products. Next slide. And then the storm surge watches and warnings are issued on a grid, while the coastal flood hazards, the CFW products, are issued for the entire NWS zone. So that'll be the most significant part you'll see, is all of Cameron County be highlighted for a, or the inland portions will be highlighted, for example, for CFW, while the storm surge, if it's only really affecting the South Padre, you'll see a little difference, that it'll be more exact along the coast. And other products that are under the coastal flood watches and warnings would be high surf advisories and high surf warnings and rip currents. Those fall under the CFW product, and they can be issued concurrently with the storm surge watch or warning, which again was not done in the past. And the CFW will be updated every 6 hours during the tropical events or after the HLS. Next slide. And then what's another feature that has been sent out in the past couple of years has been the potential tropical cyclone advisories. And this is this will be issued when there's really nothing out there. There may not be nothing really on the satellite, or just a cluster of showers and thunderstorms. So there is not a tropical cyclone currently going on, but computer models and possibly satellite images are showing that there is a potential that something may develop very quickly, and most likely near land. So that we also come out, the Hurricane Center has come out with a potential tropical cyclone advisories, and again, it gives the ability to issue a watch for a full 48 hours of lead time, and the warning for a full 36 hours. For example, if a storm would develop right off our coastline or expected to develop within 24 hours, we want to give the 36-hour, 48-hour notice, so we can come up with this. We could send out a potential tropical cyclone advisory, and it's the same. It'll have the same information that a regular advisory had with a forecast discussion and forecast points. Next slide. And again, this is an example of a potential tropical cyclone advisory. Again, it's to warn of a tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning before the formation of the depression or storm forms. So again, it gives more of a lead time, and this happens in case of a fast-moving storm that may forecast to develop. You don't want to storm right off the coastline with very little warning. So again, this gives the ability to issue watches and warnings with appropriate lead time. Next slide. Be able to advance the slide, Josh? Okay. So, okay, for the next one is a key messages graphic, and this is very useful because it combines the key messages from the Hurricane Center's discussion and important advisory graphics. So this is something that is really good for social media, and it's a quick reference to look at. It gives you key points and graphics to explain the reasoning, and it's available. And again, it's available on the social media accounts and on the Hurricane Center's website. And it just gives this has three main key messages for Hurricane Laura. And then instead of looking through the product and seeing what's the important information, this is all bullet or at least formed up where it's easy to access, and you can look at without hunting for the information. You can see all the graphics and the hazards right to the side of the wording, which is again very good for getting the best information very quickly out to everyone. Next slide, please. And then messaging at the local NWS offices, and we do that by Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. These can go out and reach a lot of people in a very short amount of time. It shows up in social media, and we could, for example, to the left, it shows how far Irma was from this Florida coast, and they gave several different quick points of bullets, so key cities in the miles. Also, there's animation, video, rainfall forecast, storm facts, and statistics. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of social media presence. When this is an example of back in Hannah, when a lot of people are looking for quick information. This is you can see meteorologist Brian Mejia and Chris Birchfield. They're doing a Facebook Live session during Hannah, and that's helps get a lot of information out, give the most current information out to all the social media users. Brian Mejia and again, Brian Adams and Chris Birchfield reached 147 views that evening of July 23rd. 9 sessions had an estimate of it reached an estimate of 391,000 followers. So it can reach a lot of people in a short amount of time, very quickly. And what happens is, Weather Service Brownsville, we would increase the social media presence. We'll lead from this beginning of what's going on before the storm even develops or has the potential to develop, all the way to the coast, activity moving to the coast. Next slide, please. And to always follow the trusted NWS sources. There's a lot of social media pages out there, and they may not all have the most current or the official and information. So following social media from a trusted source of information, and then also local NWS Twitter and Facebook pages, and the Hurricane Center forecast information we found on the at NHC_Atlantic. And it's important to get the most the reliable forecast, as there are some sites that may not be reliable that people may tend to follow. Next slide, please. And again, not only does the Weather Service, our local Weather Service office here in Brownsville, will message things on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube on information about the storm, but we also compared graphics and infographics during HANA. We also talked about generator safety and so safety after the storm. Also, we can we post links of evacuation zones, routes, and shelter locations. That was very useful, and we noticed a lot of shares and likes with the information that we provided during HANA last year. Next slide, please. So decision support services is another feature that we offer, and a lot of this we are already doing with email briefings, webinar, conference calls. We also have on-site support. We can also give information on and briefings on phone, and we also have state-level support. Next slide. So in the email briefings, usually start looking ahead, and we may just point out, send out a partner email explaining what we're expecting in upcoming next few days, or even sometimes as far as 5 days or a week from now. And we may put a graphic on like the tropical weather outlook. The graphic, as you can see in the upper right, talk about a storm moving into the Gulf. We can also talk about the forecast rain chances, as you see in the bottom right, and try to give a quick information of what we're expecting in the next few days or up to a week. Next slide, please, Josh. And then, so mentioning that, usually we do the email briefings. We'll start with the email the briefings about 5 days out, up to 120 hours out, for the potential of tropical impacts to Texas. And then as more information is given, such as the model guidance, so really getting on that, if we still see a good chance of development, we'll go with generally updated daily long range 4 to 7 days out, maybe up to 4 times a day when the tropical storm watches and warnings are in effect. So as the storm moves across the Gulf, we'll just increase the email briefings, but as watches and warnings are in effect, we will do emails up to about 4 times a day. Long ranges, 72 to 120 hours out, our emails will be aligned with Southern Region operations, the ROC. For consistency, we will make sure that what we're putting out is the same as Corpus Christi and other nearby offices and what the region as a whole is putting out, so the message will not differ from office to office. Next slide, please. And you also have webinars and conference calls, and they'll be conducted when a significant threat of tropical cyclones are impacting the valley. Next slide. Now, prior to a watch issuance, usually once a day, generally at about 96 to 120 hours out, except in special circumstances. And next slide. And then we'll go to about 72 to 48 hours out. We'll go about twice a day. And then once the watch warning is out, about 48 to up to, including 12 hours out, up to 4 times daily. And per your request, immediately after the Hurricane Center products are released at 10 a.m., 4 p.m., 10 p.m., and 4 a.m. as our regular times. And we'll also pre-call and collaborate between us and Corpus Christi again to make sure there's consistent and concise message going out. Next slide. And webinars and conference calls, the briefings may last up to 15 minutes with questions and answers. Also, slides provided ahead of time, and also address the most likely outcome and reasonable worst case scenario. And these will all be some of the key points we have in our briefings. Next slide, Josh. And then on-site support. Now with COVID, it's in some phases, and depending on the reintegration of the phases, meteorologists may be able to report to EOCs to provide decision support in advance of high impact events. We'll see how that goes in the next few weeks and months as how that with the COVID restrictions. We also the on-site support works along with emergency managers. We conduct extra briefings. You can get help for questions, to answer some of your questions you may have. And so that was something that we will do is on-site support, such as deploying to different locations. Next slide, Josh.
Okay.
Yeah, you ever take this one, or you want me to continue?
I can jump back in, Kirk, if that's all right. I mean, all right. Thanks, Kirk, for all that information. I know this is one of the heavier and longer segments of the workshop, so we appreciate everybody's attention, and we are getting toward the home stretch here. I know there's some activity in the background of my camera here. Still working at home much of the time, so there are children running around and cat and so forth. But anyway, Kirk kind of touched on this in the social media section, but we just want, not telling you guys anything you don't already know, but beware of false weather information out there. This example, this graphic circulated, on the internet and social media a couple of years ago. Coincidentally showed kind of in some ways it looks official. It's got a NOAA logo. In some ways, not so much. It shows this kind of phony hurricane cone heading toward the lower Texas coast. And, people will mimic trusted sources, fake headlines, content, graphical logos, and things like that. This can be around before, during, or immediately after events. You might see phony images of damage. There's things you can do to check the veracity of those. You can do Google reverse image searches, which we do sometimes. Before an event, you might see, one particular model run that's not particularly trustworthy, showing a big storm coming. Again, it'll show that sensationalized worst case scenario, kind of hijack or piggyback on those sources which are trusted in some way, perhaps with a logo or official looking name. And of course, manipulated graphics, sharing old images which are not current. Just take a minute, decide if it makes sense. Is it the right time of the year? Is it the right area? Does this look like the lower Texas coast or somewhere else? Was it posted by a brand new account? Can it be validated or cross-checked through other information? So just make sure you don't spread this stuff on social media. If there's ever any question, please feel free to reach out to us. The problem there, of course, is that this information does get circulated, and it can, if it's false, it can certainly have an adverse effect on the decisions people are making to keep themselves and their families safe in the event of an actual storm. So the time of arrival graphics, this has been around for a couple of years now, but it's pretty important information. As you all know, it becomes a lot more difficult to make those final preparations once the winds reach tropical storm force of 39 miles per hour or more. And what you'll see in these graphics are, these black lines showing different time frames. And there's kind of two flavors of these time of arrival graphics. And they try to account for the uncertainty in the track of the storm, the intensity, the physical size, the dimensions of the storm. And it's you can either look at the earliest reasonable arrival time of the tropical storm force winds. That's best for folks that have a low tolerance for risk. It's kind of your safety margin forecast. And then there is also the most likely time of arrival graphic, which is this example here. Best for explaining when all preparations should be completed prior to the onset of dangerous conditions. So in this case, along the North Carolina coast, the most likely time of arrival that those tropical storm force winds would move in is right around 8 a.m. We don't want to get too specific with clock time, but sometime early Thursday morning in this example. Again, this is an example of an earliest reasonable arrival time. That basically means that there is less than a 10% chance that sustained tropical storm force winds would start before the indicated time. So this is your safety margin forecast. And in this example from 2017, if you're along the northern Gulf Coast here, you should be on the safe side, 9 times out of 10 if you complete your preparations by, midday Saturday, just kind of extrapolating between Saturday 8 a.m. and Saturday 8 p.m. Again, the most likely time of arrival, we kind of talked about that, so we'll kind of move ahead in the interest of time. There are Some reminder of the recent changes to this local TCV or tropical cyclone watch warning product. It will, if you go through and read this product, which some folks do, not too many, but there are these plan, prepare, and impact and act statements at a length that can be used in Twitter. It's at a tweetable length. And these statements are provided for the 4 main hazards of wind surge, flooding, rain, and tornadoes. Now we'll revisit a little bit more detail on the hurricane threats and impacts, which we've kind of touched on already. Again, you can get to this through our local tropical webpage, or I think hurricanes.gov/HTI is another way to reach it. So if there is a storm and you click on the map, it actually bring up the latest information from that TCV text product for the area you've selected. You can find information on the expected forecast, including what and when type of information. The threat level, which starts, with kind of this basically nil threat in the tan color, and the colors get hotter as the danger threat level increases up to red or purple in the case of extreme threat or major hurricane force winds. So just kind of zoom in a little bit. If you mouse over an area in the HTI, it'll give you, what should I be concerned about? Basically the headlines: hurricane warning, storm surge warning in this case for South Florida. Where will it happen? Where are the locations? How much? What numbers are we putting on the winds? What range of wind speeds can you expect? When should I expect it? What should I prepare for? What should I be doing to get ready? In this case, we're pointing to this kind of orange threat level, which is for winds of 58 to 73 miles per hour or strong tropical storm force winds. And it'd also give you a customized impact statement based on your location and that threat level. And by the way, we're actually updating these threat levels or these impact statements for our local area this year. So hopefully we won't need to use them, but they will be a little more tailored to each individual area. As far as the flooding rain threat in the HTI, as Kirk mentioned, the Weather Prediction Center puts out their excessive rainfall outlook. And for 2020 and beyond, including this year, the flooding rain threat HTI graphic will basically be driven by a composite of the days 1 through 3 excessive rainfall outlook to make those match up a little better. Makes it a little easier for us to get a consistent message between ourselves, local neighboring offices, and from a national perspective as well. The extreme wind warning, as Barry mentioned, our office did issue several last year in a backup capacity for the Lake Charles area office during Hurricane Laura. Again, you'll only see this if you've got basically a major hurricane, a Cat 3, 4, or 5 with imminent landfall. This is your warning of last resort. You need to take action to preserve life in this case, not even worrying about property so much at this point. Usually only valid for a couple hours, but it can be reissued if the winds are continuing beyond the official time frame of the initial warning for those eye wall winds making landfall. Again, those can be issued by pretty much any coastal office, including ours, should the need arise. Kurt covered the potential storm surge flooding pretty well, so I'm going to move ahead. Barry showed this graphic about the heights of the storm already. So HURVAC, which some of you may be familiar with, it's kind of transitioned. Well, first of all, it's a hurricane tracking and decision support tool, basically geared toward the emergency management community, or you all. There's now a web-based version, and you can see the link there, and we can also provide that later if you're interested. You just have to register and sign up. There's actually a lot of improvements since they went to that web-based version, and I don't believe it's even available as a standalone desktop application anymore. So in the web-based version, you can get basically all the graphical and text forecast information from those NHC advisories that you'd ever want. You can create some reports. It's web-based, so you can access it from your tablet or smartphone as well as your computer. And if for a more interested users, you can also look at the moms and meows, which we didn't get into too much detail with here today, but kind of your worst case scenario for storm surge, which you look at when you're still several days away from landfall, based on the angle of attack the storm is coming in, its forward speed, and the intensity as well. Something that's new this year and that will not really be out there for the public, but the Hurricane Center will actually be putting out wind departure timing information as well as the onset timing information. And this has been something that's kind of been asked for, so emergency managers can get an idea of when the winds will subside below tropical storm force, which of course, affects recovery efforts and things like that. When can they get back in there safely? Again, this is not really intended for the public, only for the emergency management community, but this will be available through HURAVAC, and it'll give you that, again, the most likely and the latest reasonable departure information for both 50 knot, which is strong tropical storm force, and 34 knot kind of minimal tropical storm force winds. One thing to note, the Hurricane Center is not producing departure and timing information for hurricane force winds. It'd just be a little too hard to pin that down and maybe give people a little too much false sense of security. And this is my last slide, which I borrowed from Dan Brown's talk from last year, but just be aware of anchoring. Always stay tuned to the latest forecast. There's, in some sense, a natural human psychological tendency to kind of anchor in, get stuck on one piece of information when you're trying to make an admittedly complex decision, and not being aware of those forecast changes. So the forecasts produced by the Hurricane Center, they're folks with advanced degrees, many with doctorates, but even with that level of knowledge, they are updating this forecast every 6 hours at a minimum. So the forecast can and does change. You need to stay tuned to that. Always be aware of the latest. And just as a couple examples, this is what became Hurricane Michael in 2018. Early forecasts only had it as tropical storm force at landfall. Of course, ended up being a major hurricane hitting the Florida Panhandle. And another early forecast from Maria in 2017 as it approached Puerto Rico did have it reach hurricane strength, but not the major hurricane that ended up devastating that island back then. So if you have any feedback, you can always reach out to us at the local office, or there's an email there to send suggestions to the National Tropical Program. And that should wrap this up. If there are any questions or comments, we'd be glad to address those now.